Coogs House. Willie Fritz said the Houston Cougars are moving on. They're done with thinking about Utah. We kind of aren't because it was a lot of fun. So we got a little bit here, a little bit there, a lot of stuff to get through, but we'll get there, I promise.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougars, daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Whether you're a Houston fan or just a hey that came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I appreciate you making us your first listen each and every day. If you want to listen to the conversation, but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below what your favorite drama is. I've got a Tony Soprano bobbleheady thing over there, like clear line of sight. I'm a big Sopranos, the mobster kind of stuff guy. But tell us what your favorite drama is. Sopranos is almost a comedy, actually, but neither here nor there. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, as we tie this thing back into sports. And Willie Fritz said that Houston needs to be moving past the Utah game for Kansas State, and they're playing and coaching, and that was their Monday press conference. And I get that 24-hour rule's over them. You and I are a little bit different. We don't have to play on Saturday. So I want to kind of wrap up Utah a little bit in the first segment, talk some about Kansas State in the third segment, and I want to talk about something that's kind of plaguing the Big 12 in the third and final segment as well. So as we jump into this, I said I didn't want to completely move past Utah yet because there were some things I think we got to kind of tie a bow on. The Houston defense came to play in this one in a big, big way. Yes, I know that Utah had their quarterback problems, but they were honestly a pretty strong running team as well. A bunch of talent at tight end and wide receiver out there. And except for some missed tackles, certainly on like the second play of the game, you kind of proved in this game as Houston's defense that Kansas game and the Cincinnati game are really more of the aberrations. The more consistent thing is keeping teams to 2 touchdowns or less, right? That continues to be it's not always going to win. I understand that. But it continues to be a thing that Houston's defense does very, very well. They make the game-changing play with Halsey's pick late. Keith Cooper's fumble recovery deal, whatever you want to call that, came at the perfect time as well. A thing I want you to keep an eye on in this defense, keep an eye on this in this defense, is a coverage thing, actually, though. And it's really credits to 2 guys that play the same position, Brandon Mack and Zy Strong. They have really developed. They're playing what's called the dog position, which is kind of an end, kind of a linebacker, kind of a low safety, a lot of different things put together. And they've gotten to be a lot better in coverage. Obviously, everyone remembers the strong bat down in the end zone a couple weeks ago, but both of these guys did a pretty good job covering up what I would argue are going to be NFL tight ends, right? And they did a pretty good job, I think, also working the hole and the flat, meaning like the hook zone area and then into the flat where running back would catch a little flat route. Their development in coverage allows for a lot more fun things and blitzes and stuff like that. So don't be afraid to see Michael Batten and Kendrick Gant and Jamal Morris, those guys getting after the quarterback more because they can drop a dog player in their covered spots and kind of occupy that and throw off the offensive line. I think that works really well for this team and continue to use deception, right, for a unit that really is playing and has played all year, I think, well above expectations. I think I was probably the most optimistic of Houston Cougar basketball talkers or football talkers coming into the year on the defense, and I don't think even I thought the defense was going to be this strong. And so kudos to them for continuing developing that. I think a big part of this is so many of those transfer and hit. Carlos Allen at nose tackle from Kennesaw, obviously Keith Cooper, Michael Batten, like the whole secondary, right? Like all those guys just hit. And that's a really good job of evaluating guys in the portal by the staff for what that's worth. On the offense side of the ball, one takeaway I think you can pull out of this Utah game is that I think your Thunder Lightning combination of backs is Sanford and Burnette. And I think it's kind of good to settle into that. We came into the year, I think it was PJ. Parker Jenkins has kind of had his moments of struggle this year, whether it's a fit with the scheme or I still think he got a little dinged up in the Oklahoma game. He took like a gnarly heel to the rib cage, and that just has to hurt a little bit. Obviously, it's been months ago at this point, but that still, I think, had some impact on his early reps, whatever the case may be. I think that Sanford and Burnette are kind of your, I guess in that order, would be lightning, thunder, right? Sanford's got the speed, the shakes, the quickness. Burnett's got the power, the downhill, etc. But both guys operate well in the kind of like B gap to B gap runs, a lot of fold plays and split inside zones. And those kind of things in those B gap to B gap kind of areas work really well for them. I also think it ties well that that's the best part of the offensive line. And so that works pretty well too. Getting to the edge has been a problem. Stacy Sneed probably done that the best. He might be a third down guy because his hands are better as well as far as catching stuff out of the backfield goes. As far as you're creating a running back by committee, I think that's probably the split. If I were to guess there, I would also add, for what it's worth, that Sneed has always proved me wrong, and so I continue to think he's more of a slot type guy. And then they play him at running back, and he does really good things. So maybe I'm just hyping him up to go have another big game at Kansas State this weekend, but we'll see how that goes. I also think, and this is probably my last tidbit by my offensive tidbit coming out of this Utah game, is we started the year where Zeon Chriss was just like, didn't seem like he was allowed to throw. That just seemed like something we weren't going to do. And so I was a little perplexed as to why you wanted him to come play quarterback. And now we're working to the point where if you're going to incorporate more forward passes, or certainly if you're going to need to, these third step reads, quick things are really look like they're going to be kind of his bread and butter. He threw 6 completions to 6 different receivers. I don't think he necessarily has enough time on task to have that relationship with any one guy over anyone else, although I thought after the TCU game it was going to be Devin Williams, and then I was just flat wrong apparently. But I think whether it's the quick slant underneath a couple fades, a fade seam, he hit Joseph Manjack on the quick slant for the 28-yard touchdown, the 20-yard touchdown to Stephon Boogie Johnson, right on the quick wheel with a pick underneath it. Those kind of things where it's just a quick 1, 2, 3, your eyes on one read the whole way. Because the deal is with him is that second or 2.5 read, he might get a 1, 2 and then do it, but his legs are such a dynamic weapon that why waste time getting to a third when you can get time making yards, right? And so I think that's kind of those kind of quick hitter kind of things can be more in his repertoire. Or for what it's worth, that they also ran kind of a pick crosser to Malik Carr. They got him over the middle on the play. It got called back for a penalty, but that was going to be a big gain in the late second quarter as well, right? So the same kinds of things, right? Quick picks and quick rubs and getting them into man. And then if they're in zone, obviously finding levels and gaps and stuff like that. That may be harder to read for him at this point because the amount of range a single person can cover in Power 4 football, as far as like if you have, middle third or whatever, that middle third is a big area, but the athlete's a lot better athlete in Power 4 football. And so the transition into that may be more challenging as far as playing in zone type coverages. But I think Zeon can execute it. So that maybe just be a bigger picture thing. But on the whole, I do think there's a lot to pull out of this Utah game. And so while Coach Willie Fritz wants Houston to move on, I think that's the apt thing for an athlete to do, but I hope there's not like throwing the baby out with the bathwater and that kind of stuff, right? Because I do think that, yes, it was homecoming. You had the mojo. You had a last-second field goal, and yes, Utah's down a quarterback and has no replacement in sight, and so on, right? I do think though that there are things to peel out of this game to keep moving, and I want to make sure before we move on as fans, you and I, to Kansas State, we don't just completely abandon those either. We need to make sure we pat the guys in the back and do things well. And those are things that they're doing well. Now, I want to talk some about Kansas State as well, because I've liked watching that team all year. They were my preseason pick to win the conference this year. And unlike some other picks, I don't think that they've been disappointing. But before we get to that, I want to talk about one cool deal going on here at Locked On. And that's our buddies over at Roy, because it's time to recognize the Roy Player of the Week. So far this season, we've pulled over $20,000 to support players on Roy. Micro deposits, small, lead to massive change, big. With the Roy app, you can direct your support to any and all athletes that you love on the Houston Cougars, but I guess you could also go beyond that, ensuring all funds go to the specific player that you choose. And unlike collectives, you know exactly where support is going. You get to receive exclusive content like personal videos and stuff like that sent directly to you. The best part, though, is that it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver on the content or whatever, you get your money back. And this week, the Player of the Week, I almost didn't go here, but we went back to AJ Halsey for his second time winning this award. That means we get $100 into his NIL account. I'd love for you to join me, even if it's just $10. Let's show Halsey and the other Cougs, or if you want to go to Jack Martin, go to Keith Cooper, go to Zeon Chriss, Joseph Manjack, Boogie Johnson, whomever. Show those guys the love you have for them and the Houston Cougars. Remember, you pay today and celebrate tomorrow. Your support in NIL can help set up the team for success. So don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaways. They'll give away 2 tickets to a game in November. You just download Roy, create an account, referral code Locked On, and you're entered just like that. If you're already on Roy, any contribution to an athlete's campaign also gets you entered automatically. No purchase necessary. Avoid where we're headed. Download Roy now. Enjoy the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. And be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return_on_you for more info. Roy, support players, change the game. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Cougs here, talking about transitioning from Utah to Kansas State mindset, wrapping up and putting a bow on Utah. And now it is time to talk about those Kansas State Wildcats. And I really want to stress that this was when we did our Big 12 show to preview the season. I thought personally that Kansas State should be most people's favorite to win the whole thing this year. I thought they were really impressive a year ago. So they blew the doors off Houston a year ago up there in the Little Apple. It's a challenging place to play in late season. I think very highly of their quarterback and the coaching staff and Kleiman, those guys up there. I think they got a great thing going. And frankly, good defense run the ball. Feels like what Houston could be building with a much better recruit base in their backyard, right? So I think that part of me also saw the potential mirrors there, right? But Kansas State presently is proving me mostly right. They're 7-1 with 1 loss to BYU. Frankly, it was by a lot of points earlier this year. Kind of a blowout loss. BYU is still undefeated, so it doesn't look like such a bad loss. Kansas State's beaten Colorado and beaten Kansas in a very contested rivalry game. Both of those were close. Colorado, for its worth, has moved into the top 25. With that, it's one of their 2 losses. So I think that's impressive. Kansas State blew out Arizona, blew out West Virginia. They had a close non-con game with Tulane. And for what it's worth, Tulane, I think, has sustained a few injuries in this thing. That Tulane was ranked at the time, and they had a close win there. Their offensively, I should say, they're led by a true dual threat quarterback in Avery Johnson, who is a good sophomore, but going to be a really good junior and talking pro stuff as a senior if he continues to develop. Crazy high potential in the kid, and he came in as just this athlete kind of guy and has kind of transformed himself, his game, his body. And I guess speaking of him as a sophomore this year, I'm anticipating similar jumps along the way, obviously. As a passer, he has 16 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, 61% completions, but a roughly 9. It's some games it's closer to 8, some games it's closer to 10. ADOT, or average distance of target. And what that means is he's not just throwing quick bubbles, quick outs, quick whatever. He's really moving the ball, moving the chains when he throws it. Has 1,650 yards on the season so far. And when you think about a true sophomore that is not known as a passer, I think that those kind of things indicate that he's having a pretty good year, especially when they get up on these teams like Arizona and West Virginia. They just run the ball down the throat at the end anyway, right? He's also a really really good runner himself. He's got 5.7 yards per carry and 4 rushing touchdowns. The truth is he's kind of tall and lanky looking, but like then you get up close next to him or you see him next to a linebacker. Oh, he's got more meat on his bones than you realize. He runs through guys, over guys, around guys. He's a really talented runner. And long flowing locks gets really annoying to watch it go by. But he's a true zone read keep threat as a quarterback. The guy he would be handing it to there, the zone read running threat, the running back, DJ Giddens, he's at 945 rushing yards. He's going to break 1,000 through. I don't think Houston holds him below 60. And so he's going to break 1,000 yards in the season this weekend. And that there's still got 4 games to go after that, plus a potential Big 12 title game, plus at least a bowl game, if not a college football playoff game, and so on. The guy's going to rack up some yards this year. He's really, really talented. Credit to their offensive line. They lost a guy to the pros. I think Cooper Beebe is starting right now for the Cowboys, I want to say. He was on TV last weekend. I want to say it was the Cowboys-Niners game. Anyway, they replaced a true, like, starting as a rookie center and still have one of the best offensive lines in college football. Part of that's discipline, part of that's coaching, part of that's also just recruiting the right guys, having a system that doesn't play them until they're ready, and so on. That team can run the ball. Here's the deal. You can beat them, as BYU did, by jumping out early and forcing Johnson to be one-dimensional. And if you have an athlete at a mic or something that can spy him and run with him and just play coverage behind it, you're okay. I think Houston's actually kind of got a great setup for that. I'd probably spy with Halsey as a box safety, but I'll leave that up to Shieldwood. He's done a great job with defense all year. The trick is you're going to have to score to get to that point. And when I look at what Kansas State does and doesn't do well, they do a lot well on defense. I'm not going to make this like sugarcoat this. They're good. I think they're, of the 3 levels, linemen, linebackers, and secondary, I think that their defensive line is their weakest group. Now, that's not to say that they're bad, but I just think that the linebackers and coverage guys are a lot better. And I think that, frankly, that's actually helped Houston out, because if Houston's having success, as we've seen in the couple games they've won now, they're going to want to have success in that back part, right? They're not going to want to have success in the back part, so they're going to have success with the front line, because the back part's not really something that they've exploited a whole heck of a lot. They're going to want to run the ball some. Again, get between those guards, get between those B gaps, and get after it. Use that thunder and lightning in Sanford Burnette and Rashawn Sanford that we talked about, and get after it some. This is kind of game where I think Zeon Chriss is going to have to grow up a lot really fast, right? Sophomore, he steps in, starting mid-season. That's hard to say. Call lines fast, and ultimately, he only had a couple drives, but did not look good against Kansas. He beat a TCU team that I'm not sure is very good, and then he did beat a Utah team that has struggled this year. But I would remind you, returned most of their starters from last year's really good defense. And so I think it's fair to say that was at least a good defense that he did ultimately beat. They're over 4.5 yards per carry in that game. We talked on Monday about how it's a little deceptive, but on the whole, I think this is the kind of game where Houston, if they can get a touchdown or 2 in the first half, running the football, waste some clock in the second half, but running the football, they can feel pretty good about this one. I think Houston's defense is up to the task. It's about, will this be a 14-10 kind of game? I think that's more what Houston is worried about. Now, if Houston's defense is not up to the task, if this is the Houston of the Kansas game or the Houston of the Cincinnati game, then we've got problems, because I don't think Houston's going to score 24, 28, 30 on that Kansas State defense. I mean, they hadn't scored more than 30 on much anybody. I guess it's TCU and Rice, that's asking a lot. So Houston's got to use that defense to keep the scoring down here. Both teams running the ball will take away possessions just because it takes a lot longer, takes a lot more clock. So that'll help the low scoring aspect of this for Houston. By the way, we'll see more previewing this throughout the week. I got some stuff in the works, but I don't want to commit to it. If something falls through, then that could be bad. So more content previewing Houston, Kansas State this week. But I did want to get out of here without talking about something I think is a problem with the Big 12. But before we do that, I'll make sure we talk to you about our buddies over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We said this show today is brought to you by them because right now new customers get bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place bets on live NFL games all in one place. Middle of games, they give you stats, play-by-play, and so much more right there, right next to where you place your bets. So just visit FanDuel.com today and join the hundreds of thousands and millions of people involved with FanDuel. Now, this game, the present tense have Houston, as I'm recording this, I'm just checking my phone to make sure, as a 12.5-point dog. I don't know how optimistic or pessimistic you are about this game. I don't think it gets to be that far apart. I think this game is like a 21-17 kind of, maybe 21-14 kind of game, regardless of who wins. And so I think that's going to be closer than that 12.5. If you think I'm wrong, you think I'm right, whatever you want to do, go to FanDuel.com to do it. FanDuel, never waste a bunch of money. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more or make more money with FanDuel, the sportsbook partner of the NFL. Parker Andrew here, Locked On Cougs, talking about the Big 12 in this segment as we look at the college football playoff potential rankings coming up very, very soon. But also, probably more importantly, at the present tense AP poll, because I see a lot of favoritism. It was interesting, a widely tweeted out graphic about the voter polls, I think kind of helped share some insight there. And you're starting to see major favoritism in these polls based on kind of allegiances by state. So like the Mississippi guy, the state of Mississippi is an SEC guy because that's Mississippi and Mississippi State. That makes sense, right? The Michigan's guy, the state of Michigan guy, is a Big Ten guy. You got Michigan and Michigan State. That makes sense. But what's leaking into this as well is the people from the state of Texas kind of also leaned SEC favoritism of the SEC, because now you've got multiple Texas programs in the SEC, and that's kind of where their focus is. Florida also did that, which is interesting because University of Florida is not very good this year, but they leaned in the SEC thing. I guess I shouldn't say they did like discredited Miami or anything like that, but I'm talking about the rest of their votes, right? What's interesting in this is you had even like Missouri, right? People that covered Kansas and Missouri leaned into the SEC with Missouri, right? And it kind of like showed like where they've been watching their games. Like Iowa State, for example, dropped a spot this week while they were on a bye, and there are multiple lost teams ahead of Iowa State. That doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Colorado's climbing on the back half of this, and that feels kind of like ESPN wants them in because they'd like to talk about Coach Deion Prime Sanders. But whatever the case may be, I think that this is not a present tense Houston Cougars problem. This is a future tense Houston Cougars problem to fix, because right now we're not necessarily like vying for that college football playoff spot anyway. However, in a year where like the SEC is kind of down, I mean, Alabama's not that great. Tennessee lost to Arkansas. Arkansas lost to Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State can't beat a Big 12 team. Like across the board here, it feels like more and more the Big 12 is just kind of getting looked at like, oh, they're having fun over there, right? Like, oh, BYU's undefeated, whatever. And in the present tense, that's frustrating. In the future tense, there's no reason Houston can't be like exactly where Kansas State is right now in like 2 or 3 seasons, sitting here at 7-1 with a loss to an undefeated Big 12 team. And you're going to have these writers in the same kind of way saying, well, Big 12 is a one-team deal. And that doesn't seem right. The Big 12 is set up right now where an undefeated BYU can play an undefeated Iowa State in the Big 12 title game. And that, A, could potentially mean that they're going to leave one of those out, depending on where they have them ranked and which one wins later. That seems absurd. That seems absolutely absurd. Further, it feels like Kansas State gets left out. And I know that I just talked because I was high on them to start the year, and I really do like the way they play ball up there. But their one loss was to BYU, well, if Iowa State were to lose a Big 12 title game to BYU, what's the difference between Iowa State and Kansas State? Why couldn't you take them? So you see where I'm going with this, right? And so I understand the schedule doesn't shake out exactly like that. I'm talking more hypotheticals and theoreticals and whatever. But as a big picture thing, once that graphic's gone viral now, it's interesting to see exactly where these votes are coming from. And you would think having multiple writers from the state of Texas would be a good thing for Houston, a couple years when Houston's vying for these spots, but it's not. And I know the college football playoff is technically a little bit different ranking. It's different people doing it, right? There's a whole committee. But when they look at what your resume is, they look at like how many ranked teams you beat, where you were ranked when you did that, and so on. And if they're going to discredit the Big 12 in these AP rankings, that's going to ultimately hit that future good Houston Cougar football team's resume. So I get, and I see right in the comment right now, that Houston needs to worry about Houston first and worry about that later when it happens. And I get that. Great perspective. I'm not going to disagree and say that you shouldn't have that perspective. I am going to say that as we sit here presently, that is already on my mind, and it's something to keep an eye on while Houston continues to build and take care of business, right? And so keep an eye on that as things go. If you think I'm crazy, tell me in the comments down below. You generally do that anyway, but why not let them fly? If you want to talk to me on social media and do it there instead, you can find me at Painsworth512, PAINSWORTH512 on Twitter. I'm on Blue Sky, though I'm not using it often. I have an Instagram and all those, I have a TikTok, whatever, like all those different things as well. But you can find me on all those things to talk all things Houston Cougars and more at Painsworth512. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate it each and every day. More basketball coming out later. Fun stuff. The basketball season starting up. But if you're looking for a second listen of the day right now, my recommendation is going to be Locked On Big 12. Drake Toll's doing a great job over there, creating, sparking excitement around the conference. It's a fun time over Locked On Big 12. Locked On Cougs Prime of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every single day. Go Cougs.